I think, are up for a really, really bumpy ride ahead of us. We are literally now began to move around some incredibly strong archetypes. And I mean that seriously. It's just what technology has done to human beings is that sex has started to move as well besides gender.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Technosocial and a new series on this channel, indeed, called Body Politics, where I will be here with Aydan Connolly, investigating the strange and messy and ever fascinating topic of the physical body in the 21st century.
Today we have 3 guests coming onto the podcast, one of whom you will know, 2 who are new on the scene, and we're discussing the topic of transgenderism.
The topic for the conversation that would be really interesting to tease into is, what does transgenderism have to teach us about sex?
All right.
It's a big topic, right?
Yeah.
But please,
Just a little bit.
Aydan, would you like to go first? Where are you?
Sure. I'm a professional beer brewer. That's why it looks like it does right now. And I'm transgender. I transitioned about, this would have been 5 years ago now. And it definitely was a long process for me to come to the realization of being trans. There was a lot of, it's very complex just because of the interplay between sexuality and gender identity. And so, I think there's probably about 10 years between like the first hints for me of like, oh, there's something going on there, to the point when I actually started to seriously take it into consideration as far as like what I wanted to do with my life, with my body. And I'm pretty new to the liminal web, but I have appeared on the inaugural stage a couple of times. One time just for a chat with laymen, very casual, and then another time to discuss a food project, a food system idea that I have. So yeah, I'm really excited to be a part of this. I'm really excited to meet all of you and to have an opportunity to dive deep into this. One thing that I should note is that having this conversation is something that I've wanted to do for many years. And so I'm really excited. I'm very grateful for you all for inviting me to be able to have the conversation. And I'll leave it at that for now.
Oh, welcome. We're pleased to have you.
Yeah, so happy.
Over to Rachel.
All right. Yes, I too am a transgender, and I've been transitioning for the last few years. I hit like gender dysphoria like at the same time as I encountered John Vervaeke's work, and that was my first like kind of like, oh, philosophy can be interesting. And so that like fucked with my head a lot, like dealing with those 2 things at once, and kind of like made me think about transition totally differently than I would have otherwise, outside of the culture wars bullshit and like kind of like the simplistic versions of gender and sex and everything that people have. Yeah, I wasn't one of those like classic like, oh, I was a little girl even before I knew how to speak and that kind of thing. I did have to come to it like Aydan did, in this weird convoluted way with like, oh, I think I'm a bi dude. Oh wait, I think, like that kind of thing. So this was a long confused process for sure. But life is a lot fucking better now, that's for sure. And yeah, I'm just like super excited. Like I had to pee several times before this. I'm really excited to be here. So that's my tagline.
So all of this started because of Woman the Taster. This amazing thread, this amazing story that Aydan brought to the IDW, which is an incredible story. And Aydan, I just like have loved everything that you started posting. The minute that you came onto the scene, I was like, who is this Aydan character? And here. And then this has just turned into the biggest fireball of conversation. And we have like, wow. And I've also been so impressed by all of the things that you and Rachel have been bringing into the conversation around archetypology and the split between pathos and logos in the masculine and the mythos of the feminine. And I'd really love to get into what you all think about this model that Bart has brought to us about the tribe, and how it relates to your experiences and transitioning.
Well, I definitely feel like it resonates completely, and including for me, like having had about a decade plus in lesbian relationships, like the dynamic of the split between logo. I mean, we should go through this kind of more methodically, but the concept of like the couple essentially splitting the dynamic between logos and pathos, and that just made complete sense. And it also, like, in a way, helped me to process like some of the transition that I've had with my relationship with my wife, because we were actually married before I transitioned. And so we've gone through this transition in our relationship. And it definitely like, there's definitely a way in which I have to almost become more of a man to be able to like hold that space in the relationship, more so than I feel like I did pre-transition. And so it definitely, it's there's been a lot of like give and take as far as trying to come to like a different dynamic in our kind of like how we work together. And so that's kind of one piece, but socially it's just it all resonates really deeply. And I think one of the things that I've explored a lot is this idea that there's been there's this concept of exaptation that John Vervaeke discusses. So one of the examples he uses is the tongue is typically used for helping mastication. It's to help move the food around your mouth, help to digest. But at some point, because of the capacity of the tongue alone, which is the fun topic to talk about, we were basically primed to be able to use that adaptation for the other purpose of enunciation and speech. And so for me, like the way that I kind of have thought about gender is that there's this kind of stack of exaptations that happened along the way. So we had sexual reproduction, and I believe that sexuality was an exaptation out of reproduction. And then out of, sorry, there's something like flipping up on my screen and it's driving me crazy. I'll just not look at it. So out of, I'll literally look somewhere else. So out of sexuality, you get more of a split in terms of gender roles. I think that was like one of the things that kind of, there's like this way that our interactions, I think, might have led to structural dynamics in a tribe such that it compounded on itself to the point where we now have gender as an orientation. So it's kind of like sexuality from sexual reproduction, and then sexual orientation came out of that. And then from sexual orientation, there was gender that could have come out of there, gender roles, and then gender orientation. That's kind of like the model I'm kind of working on, we're thinking about, and I'd love to discuss all of this, of course. But in terms of archetypes, I think it matches really well with that concept because it all has to do with these interrelations and the way that as people together, the idea of the archetype is really like fascinating to me because as people together, it creates, it is the interrelation. That's like the archetypes are the dynamic of like, well, we need weight here, we need weight there, we need this balance to be able to actually come together and cohere as like social networks essentially. And so it makes sense to me that when there's kind of pieces of that archetype that are missing or somehow out of balance, that we would see our social structure and our dynamics with each other shifting in ways that don't feel stable, that don't feel that feel like really almost like dangerous to us on a deeper level. So I think that there's a lot of that's going on now where people are so unsure of the footing and how to parse things apart, how to make space for essentially gender queers, like we'll call it just that in general, so that we can kind of honor these differences and find a way to utilize them towards kind of a more positive outlook or prognosis for society. It feels like the more we just kind of debate over stuff like bathrooms, it's so old, it's so tired. That debate is so tired. Like, I think people are really frustrated and want to move past that kind of surface level of the conversation. So I just said a lot of stuff. I don't know. I would love to hear what you guys think.
Yeah, we're gonna get past the culture war bullshit and jump on the transgender express and get into like all of this juicy stuff, you know? I mean, like deep into like what are you learning like through this experience about what it is to be a woman and what it is to be a man, you know? Like that's really what I got out of this this thread was like, holy shit, there's so much for us to learn from the transgender experience, especially when it comes to hormones and how important hormones are for the creation of gender to begin with. So yeah, I want to throw that out and maybe bring Bard's voice in, being a little quiet, Bard.
Well, I just want to start by emphasizing that just to accommodate people who are terrified of these issues in the Anglo-Saxon culture, we invented the opposition of sex and gender in the English language. And I'm kind of surprised now to discover that some people don't even know that that happened only a few decades ago. For the vast majority of languages or the vast majority of cultures in the world, there is no difference between sex and gender to begin with. It's an absurdity. But the reason why we did it was, I think, because we've used humans as a constant without knowing it during all of civilization. We don't change. We might plan to have smarter children than ourselves. We might plan to marry the right guy or the right woman and have smart children, but we then get drunk on a Friday night, sleep with the wrong guy, and have terrible bastards anyway. Right? That's been going on now for the last 10,000 years. There's no improvement in sight. And whenever somebody's tried to fiddle with it, we get Adolf Hitler. Right? We don't want that. So we've given up on that. So human beings are a constant. And then we discovered, of course, technology is the only variable. And we built civilization simply on human dependency on technology. Technology, the extension of the human body. Technology, like techne, which is extension, the teaching of how we extend our body. And technology has been the only variable. Then if you look at civilization, from writing to printing to now these days having the internet around the world, technologies, cars, everything we got around is technologies. The chair I'm sitting on, a technology. So we'd still be cavemen and cavewomen unless technology had developed. But we're still cavemen and cavewomen anyway, and anything in between, including cave trans, apparently. So what's happening now, though, which terrifies people, is that we allowed sex to become like human, a category which is a constant, what we usually call an archetype, meaning it's there, it won't move much, it will take generations for it to change, it will take evolutionary time for it to change. So sex was allowed to be the constant, so we could play around with gender. And then we played around with gender, from doing all these costumes and everything. Being Owen Cox, essentially, is like gender playing all the time, constantly. It's just like, I can be anything I like, But deep down, I'm still the same gender and the same sex. So what is happening, and what fascinates me as a psychoanalyst and a philosopher, is, of course, that over the last, say, 40 to 50 years, we have increasingly been able to use technologies to alter the human body itself. That means we're both changing. Humans are now on the move. It's very, very marginal so far, but it's the beginning of a cyborgism. We're definitely going to have more and more technologies into our bodies. We're starting to question, maybe take away some body parts and adding technological ones could be an improvement. All these things, this debate over cyborgism is part of this. So that means that we're starting to move the very human constant, which we have taken for granted as an axiom in human culture for 10,000 years. And that is now moving. And that's moving at the same time as sex is moving. So it's not just gender. Gender is moving a lot like this right now, but sex is also moving. And the very people who offer to be the pioneers of this, maybe even risking their own lives, and say, we're the shamanoids, we walk ahead of the rest of you, we'll do the experiments, you can close the lab door, please, and we'll go on and do your experiment. The very people who now offer themselves to be the first cyborgs, for example, by transitioning in all kinds of directions, by the way, are now being, put on the crosses, lynch mobbed. That's what we're seeing in culture. Listen, we know that 92% of the human population are regular Joes and Jills who go to Walmart. That's okay. Do it, But for the rest, 8% of us, the 4% shamanoids, the 4% androgynism, they're the go-betweens that you need to not to go to war with each other between the sexes and go to war with other tribes. The very people you need actually in between, we're the in-between people, right? The shamanoids. We're just offering to do these experiments and see where we can take it, And that's all we've offered. And I love Rachel Hayden for going all the way they're doing it, and we're all shamanoid, all 5 of us. So let's see where this goes. And I just want to close the door around us, which is what I call the Bard Absolute, and say, listen, can just the regular Joes and Jills stay out, please? Can you give us some little territory somewhere in the world, a small place? We're very humble, but just we can isolate ourselves from you guys because you're terrified of these things, and we can go on doing the experiments in isolation and see where it goes. That's where we're at.
It's interesting, right? Because you're kind of flipping the narrative that, at least in the mainstream, for the last, it seems, as long as I've been observing these conversations, there's this fight for acceptance and inclusion and normalization of the transgender experience within Joe and Jill space. And then,
but here's the problem. I wrote a paper in 1998 with my then girlfriend and said, if you take LGBT and add the Q to it, it'll be a disaster. I warned about this in 1998. I saw that if you mix the political struggle, which is incredibly justified for LGBT rights, and if you succeeded with LGBT rights in Scandinavia, North America, take it to fucking Uganda or Iran. You have challenges, enormous challenges ahead of you. LGBT people and their rights is a political struggle. The Q letter was a cultural thing. Now, if you throw the Q letter in there, you would soon have fucking bureaucrats and activists who wanted to impose the borderland, the go-between personas that we are onto the regular Joes and Jills. Now, I understand why people got upset. That was a challenge. I wrote it in the 1990s. It's prophetic now. I said that's a terrible mistake. Do not mix the political and the cultural. Keep them separate. And I think that's what we're trying to do now. We're just saying, okay, we were right all along. Maybe now the LGBT guys can listen to us and take their struggle global, which they should have done all along, as feminists should do as well, and then just leave the queer category, which is spectrum anyway, for the experimentation. Let's keep political and cultural separate. I think that's incredibly important for our own sake.
Intriguing ideas, as always.
What do you make of it, Rachel?
I guess, I could jump back a little bit and talk about archetypes a little bit too, because when I'm new, I'm somebody said, we're new to all this stuff, but I find the whole narratology thing fascinating. I find, I was thinking about this week, when I was a kid, I don't know, 7 or 8 maybe, I had this constant daydream. Oh, and by the way, I can only see you guys once every 30 seconds change. So I have this super bad connection right now. So just in case you're wondering why I'm maybe not responding to anything.
So yeah. Don't worry.
Okay, cool. I was 7 or 8 and I had this ongoing daydream fantasy fascination with I thought I would be the kind of boy that had a Y-shaped penis, that dick with 2 heads basically, but it was hollow. The whole thing was a tube. And I was one of this weird kind of boys that was and I was listening to Bard's shit and I'm this whole split phallus thing, and then going back to the mythic, and I'm just what the hell, it was just so I'm totally wide-eyed about it, because I'm this is so true to my experience, thinking about myself in terms of mythos, especially with the hormones, makes a lot of sense, being perpetually sort of I've said on the emails, like suckered into like astrology and essential oils and all kinds of shit that like women typically get suckered into because we're like looking at this beautiful thing that's also like kind of dubious, like factually, and we're like, oh, we can't like figure it out, but there's something really cool about it, you know, at the same time. And then like now I'm even more like that, and I have to like, and like when I like act or like act in the world or like fight with somebody, it comes from a mythic place more now, you know. It's like it's all blended together, and if I realize that, I'm more effective as a person. So like just practically speaking, it's been like super useful in like the last, you know, 3 weeks since I've like found out about it.
I can assure you that if you add testosterone to the astrology, you get conspiracy theories. What are conspiracy theories? Explanations of some kind of higher power in control. But conspiracy theory means it's also a theory about the conspiracies being at war with each other. So it's not like the stars are aligned, as in astrology, which is mythical. It's rather the logos versus pathos dichotomy again, which returns in the masculine fantasy constantly. And this is of course Darren is that it matches perfectly with the body, because we have the mamella and the matrix on the female body. It's two. The female body is two. The guy's body is just the fucking phallus and nothing else to it, right? Everything else is removed, negation.
That fantasy of the split penis with a hole in it is pretty interesting.
It's
the
ovaries. The ovaries are matching the logos and the pathos dichotomy. Again, you see how this is reflected in its returns. It's beautifully done. It's just natural.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
I
was
wonder.
like, oh, sorry.
No, please, Rachel.
I was always okay. I was like, I never had, you know, I felt like, you know, imposter syndrome because I was never like, oh, you know, I need to cut my dick off when I was like 5, like some people I know or whatever. But like, then I'm like, oh yeah, no, but this is all makes like so much sense. Like thinking about it in terms of like archetypes. I'm just like, yeah, and like the ovaries thing, like the whole thing was like a tube shape, and it was like, you know, hollow. So like, yeah, I was kind of mind blown for sure.
Can you both of you talk more about what it was like to experience testosterone and estrogen and progesterone respectively, and like how that relates to coming into mythos or coming into the pathos logos split? Whoever wants to take that first. Rachel, if you want to go from your experience, that would be great. Or
oh yeah, sure. Yeah, like first of all, like, you know, they told me I would like cry at commercials all the time and shit like that. Like, you know, I would become like this weepy woman basically, and that didn't really happen. Like I cry more now than I did, but it's not like so like a lot of my experiences I feel like are pretty like valid to me because they're not what I expected and not what anybody told me was going to happen. I just had to like feel it out over time. And like my sense of boundaries was one thing that changed a lot. Like I went from like trying to maintain like a masculine sense of like kind of like, you know, armored wall, pointed like sword kind of thing to like more of a fluid thing that like went inside me, outside me. And I was like, oh, it's like a dance. Like you have to learn to dance with boundaries and not just like hold them forcefully. And like, you know, along with that, like I said, my skin got softer at the same time. And it was kind of a cool exaltation effect to me a little bit. And then like a lot of like women I know, I started to like, I became more mellow in general. Like I became more friendly. I like slower to anger for sure. My energy was less edgy and more fluid, kind of a constant flow. I couldn't like just like rev up really quick like I used to. That was like a thing that like disappeared, but I have more of a sustainable energy now. And like my energy, as you guys probably know, goes from like super mellow to like super intense if I get pushed far enough. Like it just flips over. So like I'm like just like noting that kind of like the mama bear like instinct in me that like kicks in where like I suddenly just don't give a fuck. Like it's like not about winning, it's about like murdering. Like, you know, there's not like a, you know, like any kind of like fight. It's like just kill, like, and don't care about yourself, basically. So that was an interesting change. Those were some of the main things with boundaries for sure that have shifted over. And I also like feel sensorially, which is like related to what how Aydan started this whole topic with his thread, "Woman the Taster." Like my senses have enhanced a lot, pleasure and pain both. Like sexual orgasms are like way better, harder to come by, but much better to achieve. And then like anything like physical feels better and worse. Pain is enhanced for sure. Pleasure is enhanced all around. Like pretty things are more pretty. Ugly things are more ugly. Ugly like behavior is more disgusting and ugly to me rather than like something I like disapprove of. I don't like disapprove like mentally so much as I'm just like, get the fuck away from me. You know, like that kind of like gross instead of like, yeah, abstract or whatever. And like smells especially became intense, especially like anything that's like I'm like, oh fuck, our house stinks or whatever. Like, and I would never have noticed that before, but like suddenly I'm like, we got to get rid of whatever is in the fridge or something. So it like goes along with that whole disgust reaction that's really enhanced to me right now. And I think, you know, related to Bard's thing about like women kind of being the like the antenna or whatever, like for like paranoia and just like keeping an eye on what's going on in the tribe and like having that sense of like disgust and smell, like something smells fishy, something smells rotten. That was another like really big piece of it. So yeah, you know, I love it all because it's such an enhancement. It's like a harder journey in a way and easier in other ways, but like it's just like more of everything. In except for that spiky energy. I don't have that shit.
Amazing.
How about you, Aydan?
Yeah, Aydan, tell us.
Yeah. So it's like awesome listening to Rachel talk about this because yeah, it all makes so much sense to me. So for me, I definitely became much more like the way that I would describe it is like estrogen, progesterone, more or less you're kind of like on this roller coaster in terms of like your energy flows. So there's like these like buildups that happen, and then you kind of like you can kind of, you know, be sailing down and free falling, and the twists and turns and everything. So it's like very things are always kind of shifting, I feel like. But with testosterone, it's like just a current of energy. Like it's just there's just a sense of there's a lot less kind of ambiguity about things, except that it's I feel very much like that split between the logos and the pathos. Like that's something that I experience a lot, and it's actually something that Rachel and I were discussing this the other day. That I mean, via all of our exchanges, that for the feminine, the kind of like the vulnerability and the angst, I think, is this feeling of being torn open, and that for the masculine, it's this feeling in angst of being torn apart. And I think for me, that's like this is part of like the complexity as a trans person going through transition, is that it's not like oh, like my life is fixed because I did this thing, I made this decision. It's more like, okay, well, I've compromised in my in a way to try to match better like what felt right to me. But that doesn't necessarily mean it feels good all the time. So I think that like my needs definitely shifted in terms of like I feel like I needed a lot more time kind of on my own. I definitely felt the boundary shift, as Rachel was describing, where for me, it's not like I became detached, but sometimes, like in a more negative state, that's kind of what it ends up feeling like. There's a much more firm boundary between me and the world around me and the people around me. I started kind of veering more in my career towards the engineering part of it. So like when I was first a brewer, I was way more involved in like the tasting process. Like I was more involved in recipe formulation. I was like really getting into like specific ingredients and like the nuances between those things, and really like, you know, and part of this is just like a practical shift in like the job, like the actual specific job that I had. But yeah, now it's like, you know, I'm thinking about the equipment all the time. I'm thinking about the equipment, I'm listening to the equipment. I'm listening to the pumps. I'm listening to the steam. I'm listening, you know, and there's just kind of a dynamic kind of relationship that I have with all of this machinery that I work with, to the point where it upsets me when I hear people misusing it. Like it's like I'm like, you're cavitating the pump. The pump is cavitating. Like, can't you hear that? So another thing that was kind of interesting for me was I used to be, when I was younger, I was like a very, very nervous driver. I did not like driving. I avoided it as much as I could. Like when I was a teenager through my 20s, I got in a terrible car accident when I was in my 20s. And so I just kind of like had this mindset that I just didn't like driving cars. And through my transition, it's just like I actually had to set up boundaries for myself consciously for how I was driving, because I wanted to drive so fast all of the time. It became problematic. Like I was like, I luckily no accidents, luckily no tickets, but I definitely there was this like huge rush. Like I would just get this rush of energy from like literally the feel of the car. Like I could feel the weight, I could feel the momentum of it, and just like there was something so exciting. This is terrible to admit to, but it was something so exciting to like just barely making it through, to like squeeze through like from behind a semi in front of another car. Like I just became like this daredevil. And it was so like counter to anything that I'd ever done as a kid, and all through my 20s. So that was a very noticeable shift for me. And I would say another thing that kind of matches well in terms of like a counterbalance on testosterone is that I really started thinking more systematically. Like I started thinking a lot more about like I always want to like kind of go to the bigger picture. I'm going to the bigger picture. So even let's say at work, for example, if I notice something happening with like the measurements that I'm taking, like readings I'm taking during a brew, I'm like automatically kind of like contextualizing it into like all of the other experiences I've had in the process, and like reevaluating the process, reevaluating like how, okay, what are the little details that I can adjust to kind of make things just like a little bit better. And it's hard to say whether or not that's something that I would have done if I weren't on testosterone, but it's like my attention to detail like shifted to different things. It's not like I don't care about detail anymore. It's just, it's a completely like the orientation of that attention changed.
Amazing. Wow, so much there. Alexander, I'd love to hear what you think about all this.
Well, it was actually you and Raven, you and I, when we had these discussions, we were in France a couple of years ago, and it was this idea that the logos path was split that was so obvious to us in the masculine mind. It's also an idea that Camille Pagles has endorsed as well, that there is a struggle in the male mind constantly, which the female mind doesn't have. So if you say yin and yang these days, even Taoists in China say yang as well. They say yang and yang about the masculine these days, which is great because it's split. It's yang and yang, and then there's the yin. In other words, the masculine supposed will to power that Nietzsche talks about is actually two different wills. It's the will to intelligence and it's the will to transcendence. And men are cursed by both, more or less. And McGilchrist writes beautifully about the split brain, but he actually writes about the masculine brain. We should have a female equivalent who writes a book about the female brain and how it has its wholeness. And I think Rachel agrees with this, that if you do go transition towards women, it is because you feel that you are mythical, and the mythos is your story, and you want to be that mythos so much, because we're all going to end up realizing that the brain is the sex organ. Everything else is cosmetics, but the brain is the sex organ. It's all in the brain, right? So I think you and I, Raven, had that conversation, and we came up with this idea that maybe we should just go around and check with lesbian couples that if the logos pathos actually is within the lesbian relationships, And our friend Fanny, sitting behind us, who's some kind of wonderful, beautiful, queer, bisexual, healing girl. She's just awesome. And she said, well, it doesn't rhyme with me. And we just turned around and said, you're not lesbian, Fanny. You're shamanoid sexual. you just don't care about genders and sex. And then she goes, yeah, that's probably right. That's probably right. Okay. So you're out of the picture. Let's go for lesbo couples and see how they're doing. The lesbo couples have left the big cities, moved to the countryside, and started small hotels. Because lesbians are really good at hotels. I should tell you that, Aydan, the difference between the butch dyke is she runs a good hotel with her fam really well. But when she starts taking testosterone and becomes a trans man, she runs a fucking hotel chain. That's what happens.
That sounds right.
Yeah, that sounds right. So are you. You run a fucking beer brewing company, brother. There you go. There you go. So it's just an extension of personality. It's there. It was there all along. Like I follow a lot of women, for example, who were lesbians, and they were the femme, they were the woman of logos, and then the girlfriend became the boyfriend because of transition, and they stayed. And then, of course, this is a really interesting discussion. So what did they experience? And they said, well, I experienced personally in my mind a movement from the woman of logos that I can key into a woman of mythos. But in reality, he was he all along. I knew he was he all along. I wouldn't have married him. I wouldn't have been with him unless I'd been the guy. And I was actually pushing him towards the transition. Right? So she would then be allowed to go from a woman of logos that she could hold against the sort of butch dyke persona to then go into the woman of mythos. And that's what they experience without taking any drugs or doing any transition themselves, technically speaking. They go through transition, discovering that there was a deeper woman of mythos behind it, but they can still play the woman of logos when they want to. And this is the strength. This just strengthens our theory that the logos pathos is both a male dichotomy. It's also dichotomy that lesbians are wonderful to sit down and have discussions with because it helps them understand their relationships. It often helps the butch dyke to decide to stay butch dyke and go all in on being the woman of pathos, being the woman on fire and all that. But for some women, like obviously was the case with you, Aydan, there was the guy inside. There was just the guy inside your brain. And I worked as a psychoanalyst with my transition analysants. I don't say patients, for God's sake. My transition analysants I'm working with the past 25, 30 years. It's been easier to spot them eventually. I find it very easy to spot them. I just asked them out for a date. I asked them to put on the clothes they prefer to wear. And I book a chambre séparée. And we go for a date. It's a friend's date, or it's a guy's girl date, or whatever you want to call it. It's a date. And if the person shines during the date, I just tell them, in the elevator downstairs, you're doing transition. This is so you. You're right there. Do it, right? So it's just obvious when you allow the brain or the mind to play out what it wants. And the two conditions for transition work that I work with, one is to always love the person you were. Totally endorse and love the person you were. That is your history. You must have a history. You must have a root of the phallus before you have a phallus and become grown up, right? Love the person you were. Nothing wrong with that person at all. This is just a possibility to go cyborg. Do the shots, do the surgery, whatever you like to do, whatever is best for you, and then, which is a pragmatic question, and then go all the way. But I think it's really interesting. We can play with the logos pathos dichotomy as a masculine, meaning some people are drawn into having that struggle inside themselves. That is what a trans man wants. He wants to be that struggle. He loves the struggle. He knows that women love that struggle too. Very often these guys, the first thing they do when they got it's always the hormone shot. It's always the difference. It's the first hormone shot. And the first reaction when they get the first hormone shot is just like, this is so me. This is so me. This is so me, right? Good sign. Okay. Next, they go and buy a motorbike and they drive through India or something on their own. First thing to do. It's like they want to be Marlboro Man in the Wild West or something. The first thing to do. It's not about the women or about men or relationships. You just want to be that person that they are. Rachel, how about you? How about being woman of mythos? What did you explore?
Yeah.
And what is left of the logos pathos struggle inside of you? Is there any left of it, or was there any?
That is such a good question because it was a big thing for me before. Like it was really hard to achieve manhood or whatever. obviously, beforehand. And so I didn't really like, I kind of checked out of everything, I feel like it was just like but the clothes I wore were like the drab as possible, everything. Like I didn't shave, I didn't do anything like, you know what I mean? It was just like barely living in some ways, like just get me through this world so I can do something interesting, hopefully, but like there was no sense of I feel like maybe I tended more toward logos overall, like that was like I was drawn in that direction. But now it's like I said, it's like sinking back. It's like, when you talk about like auto eros or whatever, it's like I feel like I'm drawn toward the mythos, but it's like drawing backwards. Like it's like, oh, I can just like settle back into this. And it's so fucking relaxing, like to just exist in that way. And it is like there's an erotic feeling to it. There's like a relational beauty magic to it. Like everything just like comes alive. Like I'm thinking about like, I talk to people so much and just interact with people and like in public all the time. Like I just smile at people like randomly because I like doing it so much. Like it's just like this feeling of like ease in my being. So like yeah, like it's really interesting because the struggle is so enmeshed in shadow prior to this, and like now it's like, oh, like it's also like supposed to be in shadow. Like that's kind of the cool part for me, I guess. I'm just realizing now is like, well, of course it would be in shadow if it's like if I was supposed to be more mythos or whatever, then it makes sense that it would be in the mists, right?
Can you double click on that concept of auto eros that came up in our thread? I'd love for you to explain that a little bit more.
Oh, God. Oh, me explain it? Oh, great.
Yeah,
Thanks.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Mentioned it, What does
Okay.
that
I'll
mean
explain
to
it to you
you?
guys.
Yeah, how do you understand it?
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, for me, it's like the sense of like, well, like Bart was just talking about like this, like, oh, like this trans dude's gonna get on a motorcycle and be the Marlboro Man or whatever. Like it's like you want to be that thing, right? So like yeah, I had this like image of like this like goth chick in like high school that I should have been or something, like that's what I would have been, like the raggedy sweater. I had the like black fingernail polish that was wearing off, like all that shit, like in my mind. And so there was a sense, and it definitely like for me, there definitely is like a release of like libido during transition or pre-transition or whatever, like where you're like, oh, like all this energy, it's very sexual, you get turned on by it, it's like amazing. And it's also like it exaps into other areas of your life, so like relational or whatever, and it felt like it made me buy into the auto eros thing a whole lot. I think like if I hadn't like understood myself at this point, like I would be like, whatever, that's some weird Freudian shit and he's been dead a long time. But like like now that I'm like getting into philosophy more and like understanding like, oh, this actually means this in my life. Yeah, I'm just like, again, like super fascinated by this whole thing.
It was Ravens and my discovery when we asked the question that Owen started tonight's conversation with. Was the question of what can transgender people teach the rest of us? And of course, what can be taught here, the fantastic lesson learned, is what unites straight and gay people that they therefore don't see. And the way we look at it, it's like a switch. Like the switch, what you switched on is that you're actually into yourself. You are autoerotic. The lesson learned from trans people is that all people are autoerotic, but it's so obvious for straight and gay people that they don't realize that they're autoerotic. That means, for example, that if I got a dick and I'm a guy, I want to fuck a woman and I'm straight and I'm regular Joe, I don't want to have her gender, or I mean, I don't want to have her sex. I don't want to. I want to take my dick that I love and push it inside the pussy, and that's called penetration, and maybe feel some wholeness for a few minutes or something, which is what men try to get when they try to enter the cave, so to speak. But you are perfectly happy with your own sex, with your own dick, right? And the same thing goes with women. They worship their matrix, they worship their mamilla, they worship their own body. And the only difference between a lesbian woman and a straight woman is that the straight woman wants to complement her pussy with having a dick inside of it. Whereas a lesbian woman says, no, I don't want the dick. It means nothing to me. I want another woman's body next to me. So what you do is then they're in the social gay people, they switch. So this is why I said that this is proven by data, whether you like it or not. It sounds like a bit of a cliche, but when I go hunting in the north of Sweden, I have the lesbians with me. They got bigger guns than I have, and they shoot moose before I do. And they drag the fucking moose home to their girlfriends and say, bye guys, I've got my fucking moose, off I go. They're great hunters. Like, they live in the countryside. Like, we told this to a Canadian lesbian friend of ours, Raven, and she said, "Why the fuck do I live in Toronto? I want to live in the fucking countryside." Yeah, the gay guys fooled you. You wanted to live in a city, be urban. You want to be rural because you're fucking lesbo. Go live rural, right? So, whereas, of course, then any guy who has any problems whatsoever, gay guys that comes to one of my men events, I just tell them, listen, the gay guys fix your fucking wives and they put on shoes on your fucking wives and fix your fucking hair. So you want to fuck your wife once more, right? You owe them an apology for anything you ever said that was bad about them, ever. Like, because they're your go-betweens. And without them, your wife wouldn't be there, right? So keep the gay guys in your wife's lives, right? So the go-between factor is so strong that in the social, for gay people, the switch goes the other way. So gay people switch comfortably to the opposite gender in the social, which is exactly why the sexual prefer to stay with their own sex. Now, it makes sense for gay people, it makes sense to lesbians. So we got a full model explaining straight people, gays, and lesbians. Now, here's the wonderful thing with trans people. With trans people, it's earlier. It's in the autosexual relationship. That is different, which means it's through trans people we have discovered that people are autosexual. It's just we haven't seen it because we haven't seen a difference between gay and straight people, and because we never saw the difference, we didn't see that. What we learned from trans people now, the important lesson is that we're all autosexual, which is my work with all people. I can start with them as autosexual beings. That for me is the big lesson.
Oh yeah, definitely. And Aydan, does that resonate with you? Yeah.
Yeah, I actually had like a really random thought just now. What do you think that says about people who claim to be asexual?
I don't believe asexuality exists. And when you ask asexuals and sit down with them and talk to them, they have rich sex lives and, you know, they're very often autistic, but they jerk off a lot and things like that. And I'm just saying, no, you just got to go into exhibitionism and voyeurism and you will love it. And then I give them the whole tantric hologram. So when I teach tantric sex, I say it's a hologram. It's masculine, feminine here. It's dominant, submissive here. And it's exhibitionist, voyeur here. And the funny thing is, precisely in the EV axis and the exhibitionist voyeurism, you discover as a straight person that you have a sexual relationship with your own gender. This is where men discover that they have sexual relationship with other men, but they have it ritually. They might fuck women together. They might get turned on by seeing another man fucking their wife. All those things they start to play them out in the EV. And the EV axis means they don't have to go and think it's dominant or submissive because that's a totally different axis. So they have to mistake one for the other, just like they learned to not mistake masculine and feminine for being dominant and submissive. You can play with all of them. So you basically draw a hologram and say, here's a box. You got masculine and feminine there. You got dominant submissive here. You got exhibitionist voyeur here. Now you can just put yourself in a point in this hologram. Your perfect sexual partner to start with when you do a tantric course is the exact opposite of that box. And then they go, so what am I then going to do? You're just going to learn how to dance around your point. Okay? Don't worry when the tantrikas come into the room. These men and women are shamanoid and their sexuality just beyond anything. They fuck planets. So when they come into the room, they fly around the whole hologram. You're not supposed to imitate them. It's tantra. You're just supposed to love the fact that there are people who could do that. But you just got to try to dance around your point and you'll be perfectly happy. And you'll have a much richer, wealthier sex life because of it. And they love it. And here's the funny thing, of course, that the question with EV, Raven's clever question always, is that if EV is how straight guys and straight women learn how to appreciate their own sex sexually, the question is, what do you do with the gay guys? I walked off into the gay guys, and this is what they do. They sit in a gay bar on a Saturday night. A straight guy with a big dick enters the space, and they want him so badly. But the fatso fag hag sitting at the door gets the guy. So the fatso fag hag with her big boobs walks off with a straight guy with a big dick. And gay guy gets so frustrated, he goes to the fucking gay sauna and fucks 11 guys. Who do you think's on the phone with each other the next day? The gay guy and the fag hag, experiencing exhibitionism, voyeurism. They can't get enough of telling all the details about last night, which just shows the beauty of the EV axis. The EV axis was complements and completes the trashy old conflict of hetero and bi and gay and whatever. We are all completely sexual. And I think asexual people, they just haven't understood the full hologram. When you explain the EV to them, oh God, I'm so comfortable doing that. Yeah, pick up a fucking camera next time and make a porn movie and become a director. And they love it. So much for asexuality. It's just that we haven't given them the space to imagine what their sexuality would be like. So they put an A in front of it just to get out of the game that to them is too confusing.
You know, it's funny on that exact point, right? I once had a conversation with a guy who said he was asexual, and I basically said, "No, I don't think you are. I think you are sexual." And he lit up. He said, "Really?" I feel seen.
Or as I say when somebody says they're asexual, no, baby, you're way too young for that. That comes after 85 in the retirement home, not when you're 33. Listen, no. And then I try to explain it with a hologram, and it's very, very, it's so liberating for them. That's my experience.
So now that you've satisfied my curiosity, for me, it definitely resonates that that there's an autosexuality, because my experience in coming to terms with being trans had very much to do with how sexual I felt presenting masculinely. And it was like I immediately I felt alive. I went to a drag night at like the university I was attending at the time, and it was the first time I had like really consciously tried to dress androgynously or masculinely, and it was a total. I felt alive. Like I just felt so sexy. Like it just was like a totally different feel to it compared to all, you know, when I was in high school, when I was in middle school. I was the youngest in my family, and I have a sister who's 3 years older than me, and she must have like picked up on something about me, because she just like she would dress me. She would take me to the store, and we would shop, and she would pick out stuff for me to wear, because I had no sense of what I wanted to put on my body. I had no idea, like if I was trying to put on feminine clothes, it just like didn't make sense to me. And so that was like a distinct shift for me. Like when I started to present masculinely, it was like I had style. I had a sense of there was like a depth of flavor to my identity that had not been there before. And so and it's definitely it's a sexually charged experience. Like when you have that experience of like if you can like really own that and feel like you like this is who I am, there's a different kind of dynamism with your sexuality in that way. And so honestly, like I think that I was able to kind of get through the 10 years between that experience and when I first started transitioning, because there's plenty of room to play around with presentation. And so, you know, I essentially appeared to be butch dyke for that decade, and it worked for me. You know, I wasn't suffering to the point where you know, I've never been suicidal or anything like that, but you know, as I was coming to terms with the idea of possibly transitioning, like really it had a lot to do with saying, okay, well, you know, I can socially do these things, like as far as like my dress and everything, but when I learned like the ways that my experience and my body would change using the hormones, that just kicked it up a notch. Like I was like, I can grow a fucking beard. Like I was like I can grow facial hair. Like this was like a revelation for me. Like I was like, oh my God, like it just was a total game changer. Like, cause originally when I was like exploring the idea, all I wanted to do, I was like, oh, I don't want to menstruate. I don't want to menstruate. So like, I'll just go on some medication so I don't menstruate. But there was like this like little step between that and then realizing like, oh wait, if I just take testosterone, like all of these things happen. And it was totally a huge shift for me. If I had to think about doing like surgeries and stuff like that, it's a lot bigger of a barrier for me. But I do remember and like it's a moment of exposure here, but I remember literally putting makeup on my face to draw a beard on, and I was like, I was turned on. Like I was like, it was so amazing to just like have that experience, like just in my house, Like, I'm not even presenting to anybody, but just to feel that experience of looking at my face and seeing that, totally game changer. So I definitely think it makes complete sense that this would be a dynamic that's hidden normally outside of the trans experience. That completely makes sense to me. It totally follows.
I'd say it
Yeah,
makes
like
perfect sense to me too. It's the entire pattern is there because it's also the butch dyke who wants to stay butch dyke and couldn't think of transitioning as well.
And
Because
I've had those friends too.
she's like totally into the whole androgynous experience. She's the girl that I go and buy cigars with, like, you know, because the ultimate phallic sign for her is just smoking the cigar. And she's like, "Ain't I sexy here as a woman smoking a cigar?" She's like a real butch dyke here, right? So they're happy. They're happy. It's just like gay guys
Yeah.
are when the gay guy comes through as the gay guy, comes out open as the gay guy, and has an androgynous personality, and he's proud of it. It's just so wonderful to see. This is what I mean with taking a person on a date. And they just discovered that, to be honest about it, the gray mesh of a person you saw in the morning at 10 o'clock in the morning, at 10 o'clock at night, sitting opposite you, shining, bubbly, alive, right? Exactly has drawn the beard, but isn't there yet. Or as I would say, to add to that, I've never seen men laugh of joy at hair loss, except for trans men. Because it just confirms that it's me, right? Hair loss coming on, it's hair coming. And it's just wonderful to see. That's how much it means. And this is the brain, mind tied to the hormones. This is fundamentally what it is. And that means the lesson learned is that everybody is an autosexual. It just wasn't obvious for the straight and the gay people until the trans people came along and told them.
Rachel,
It's funny you said the thing about hair loss, because I noticed it started receding a little bit and starting to get a little bit thinner. And it was like one of the few things that I had pride in before transition was my hair. And so it was funny for me to kind of like go through this processing of, okay, this is like potential future no hair. And I really had that experience. Like I was like, you know what, this is kind of cool. Like there's like something about this that like there's, I don't want to reach for like a way to get out of that. Like it doesn't make sense to me. And it's funny because I actually saw a non-binary therapist for a period of time early in my transition. And they specifically had a conversation with me about how like, you know, like I started to notice I was on testosterone, but I started noticing my hair is starting to go. So I'm going to stop it now. And that's the difference. You know, I think that's a really big difference between who I am and who they are. Anyways, I'm sorry I interrupted.
No, I wanted to see if Rachel had anything to bring into this dialogue.
this is like such an interesting subject because like maybe it's because we've like sort of like neutered gender transition like completely away from sex a lot of the time like in the dialogue, but like what I end up seeing happening a lot is like trans women my age, we like transition and then we're wearing like fucking like 14-year-old mini skirts and high heels or whatever, like we look like we're like teenagers, right, or trying to be, and it's like it's hard to watch happen to people. It's like I totally get it though. Like I totally get it. Like I'm like I want to have that experience too, but like and like that explosion of like energy comes out and it's amazing. But it's also like okay, like how do we like if we had a better conversation about the whole thing, we could like actually like make that work better for them, and then they wouldn't like look back and be like, oh fuck, what did I do for 3 years? You know, like I looked like I was trying to be like 16.
Rachel,
you know, not to be like
it's the same for gay
anything,
people.
but
The problem is that the teenage years are so fundamental to our identity. And as a trans person, LGBT person, you'd be denied those years. That's why the gay guys try to look like teenagers with t-shirts that are way too tight, too much muscles, too much focus on youth and looks in their 40s. But I think it makes sense. I think it's easy to understand. It's one of those things that's really, really hard to turn around, and rather maybe there's an identity to be explored, like the girlish 35-year-old rather than the girlish 15-year-old could have her own value for herself. I don't know. I mean, it's up to you. You'll explore that, Rachel.
Yeah.
But compared with this is where trans people have a lot to learn also by comparing with the LGs. So the lesbians and the gays have the same experience because they were denied at the high school years, they were denied their identity, right? They had to postpone everything. So they become teenagers when they're 25 and move to a big city and finally come out, right? So something similar, I think.
Totally. Yeah, that tracks completely to me. Like, I think it is a huge learning experience to watch like someone gay go through that whole thing and then be like, oh, right, I'm doing that except for like, I'm doing that in all kinds of areas of my life. Like, and now like me, I'm picking up like teenage slang from the people I work with all the time, right? Like, and I'm sure it looks weird on me, but like, I just like doing it. I'm thinking about getting a stuffed fucking unicorn for my room, at like 46. Like, and I'm like, I should just do it though, because,
It's very common among trans women, that experience. And they often see themselves as being girlish. And I'm just like, go girlish then, stay with it. Don't try to imitate somebody else who haven't even considered who they are. One of the most beautiful things I heard from a woman who's really into trans men was, I just asked her out of curiosity. She wanted the trans men. She helped men become trans and do transition. He turned her on. And she was very beautiful. I just asked her, said that, okay, you can have any man you want. Why the trans men? Why are you so hot? Why are they so hot? Because they make a fucking effort. Her identity, her total sexual identity was that I want a man who makes an effort. And modern men don't make an effort to become men. They're not real men. The trans men have made an effort, obviously. So I love trans men. And I think there's something to that. Definitely something to that.
Yeah.
The longer journey creates a maturity that the shorter journey doesn't have.
Yeah, it just goes back to like the lack of developmental rituals and shit like that in our culture, right? That like men aren't becoming men, women aren't becoming women. Like it's just kind of this, we're like all ambiguous and uncertain about things. And I feel like that is one thing I've been like, it forced me to think about it so much, like gender as an aspirational developmental process. Like, how do you become the thing that you are in some way, And then like looking back on other people and being like, oh, they're not doing it either. Like society's just not doing it at all. Like a mess.
Yeah, it reminds me of one of the points
Yes.
that really struck me in Camille Paglia when I read one of her essays about men and women not being interested, especially men, in having the costume anymore, not wearing jackets, not wearing nice trousers or shoes or anything like this that actually do mark out the sexual polarity. That effort is, I think Paglia is like everyone just wants to wear baggy t-shirt and shorts all the time, which actually isn't, especially for the Joes and Jills, very hot. And it always makes me think as well about the kind of mainstream androgenization, where androgynous culture, when it's fascinating, I find it's like Michael Jackson's or like Axl Rose's, who are both simultaneously more masculine and more feminine than you at the same time, rather than the kind of murky gray thing in the middle.
But that's why the problem was that masculinity was swept out the door after 1945. We haven't really begun to understand the shock of the bomb yet. It is really the biggest event in human history, whether we like it or not, but it's called Hiroshima, right? And with Hitler and Stalin, I should add, and Touré in Japan, out goes the little boy pharaohs of the world. And all of masculinity basically was swept out the door as well, because we couldn't difference between the pathos that these guys had and the proper logos. And when pathos is terrible, logos survives. And when logos goes wrong, then pathos comes back. So instead of having the dialectic of the masculine, we just basically banned masculine altogether, say it's all bad. We called it patriarchy, the P word, threw it out the door, and there was supposed to be something else instead, except nobody knew what. And women were left basically copying men instead of becoming women. And that became the world after 1945. And we filled the space, the empty space we should have had the male role models or the male lesser gods was filled with shamanoids. The rock star became the male role model. And rock stars often killed themselves when they're 25. Kurt Cobain, Jimi Hendrix, that's the standard for rock stars. That's the standard for shamanoid people. We know that because we're all shamanoid and androgynous sitting in this conversation right now. The vast majority of people are not. I think the terrible mistake of the 20th century, and I think Paglia agrees on this one, is that shamanoids were put in the wrong place. The shamanoids were idolized. It turned into the music industry and the rock industry and the pop cultural industry and all that. And it went terribly wrong in the sense that regular Joes and regular Jills became incredibly insecure about who they are. Rite of passage disappeared in our culture. Military service disappeared. All these things disappeared. And suddenly we ended up some kind of unisex mess where sexual attraction was still operating on the lower level with pornography and everything exploding in all directions, but socially it couldn't make any sense any longer. So in the social sphere, we got the gender confusion, which wasn't our fault. But the fault was that we were dragged into the open, put on stages, idolized, although we are only happy with our own kind. Preferably, I go to Burning Man or something like that and find the other shamanoids and androgynous people. We begin to be the outcasts of the world. And please leave us to ourselves in the wilderness, right? But because the shamanoids filled that space, there has to be a return to a more traditional masculine to femininity. The way we're doing it in the men's movement is very interesting right now. The big new theme is the art of seduction. Taking women on a date. What does that mean? Dressing up, becoming a gentleman, getting manners, fixing your fucking nails, getting the right shoes on, taking her on a date, and not even taking her home to fuck her that night, but rather having another table booked 2 weeks later. So using her even more, right? What it means to seduce a woman. And when the guys go, why are we doing this next? Because this is what women want from us and what we should have done all along. This is celebrating proper, genuine, authentic masculinity. And so we can get these guys more secure about who they are, and we get the women more secure about who they are, so they become a lot less transphobic. Transphobia is not about us, it's about them and their insecurities. It always has been.
Yeah, and this does check out with my experience with dating a Romanian girl who is constantly mind blown by Western men. She's like, they don't understand how to talk to someone in a restaurant. It aligns very much with what Alexander said.
I discovered at the men's conference like 8 years ago. I opened the conference and I just asked a very straightforward question. Let's be honest, guys, but who in this room is trying to get recognition from women? It was all the Scandinavian Englishmen who raised their hands. The Polacks looked at them and said, what the fuck's wrong with you? Recognition from women? We stopped doing that when we were 12. You get your fucking recognition from men. And the Scandinavians, the Englishmen just sat down and were totally like obliterated. They were just like done. And I tell them, you've got a lot of men's work to do, guys. Did you hear what these guys just said? That's something you should have stopped when you were 12, because women are your delivery station. You don't get recognition from women. They're not mummies who applaud you. They find it incredibly unsexy. Stop doing it now. And that's why you put them on a tantric sex course the next day, the first thing we did, because they couldn't do anything else at that stage. And it is a common phenomenon with this sort of the feminine man becoming insecure. And then, of course, the woman in response to that being insecure about her sexuality and her identity too. And I think this is the major problem. But the reason why we have a transphobia, it's very real, is because the people are so uncertain about themselves. Otherwise, they'd be okay. They'd be fine. They'd be fine. No difference. Archetypes would make sense. Oh, he's different from me. Good.
Yeah, this is where I think your tribal mapping, Alexander, is very helpful for just explaining to people simply. Like, just think, right? Village. Woods outside of the village with weirdos in it. People out in the woods catch the people who end up stumbling out of the village.
Inner realm, matriarchy, women. Delivery station. And for good reasons, also the paranoid and the sensitive, right? Something starts to go wrong, you're sensitive first, okay? Outside that outer realm, hunters, warriors, patriarchy. In between that, you need a lot of gay guys and lesbians to figure that out, because sexual attraction is going to pull the men and women apart to make them more attracted to the alienness of each other, which means that gays and lesbians can go in between. That's why we have androgynous in between. Outside of that, the shamanoid. 4% of the population, any human population, are shamanoid creatures. They take risks on a level nobody else does. They're incredibly independent. They can take care of themselves. The men and women are allowed to live in the wilderness, and they're basically best left to their own devices. You go and see them, though, when you need to talk to the outside world without getting killed. The shamanoids have a monopoly. That monopoly is all connections with strangers. That includes strangers from other tribes. That includes gods above, demons below, anything else. You go and see the shaman, have a conversation with the outside world without getting killed. That is fundamentally archetypology because we lived in a society that believed this and that shaped us for millions of years. Flock animals have these behaviors, these traits, right? So that's archetypology. If you change that, well, maybe we are beginning only slightly marginally changing it, and people are really upset with that and are shocked by it and find it threatening, cyborgism. But that's what we're doing. We are doing that as we speak in this conversation. We are allowed to do that too because we have the technologies to do it. But the archetypology should be respected. And this is why the strongest case for a trans person going through transition is to say, listen, if your mind has already decided which sex you are, and if that doesn't fit whatever else you got in your body, you're perfectly allowed to go and make any changes you like that are available to you. Just make sure you make a decision and stay with it and own it. And once you own it, it's become truth as an act and you are it. And I've never seen anybody regret that. Never. Not when they're going through that process that I made my decision, I am my decision, I'm staying with it, I'm doing it.
I think like one of the dangers that comes up in the conversation, kind of on the pro-trans side, is that it's a denial of there being a transition at all. There's a sense that like, well, I was already this, I was already a woman, I was already a man, always. And that's there's a denial of the reality of where they came from and then the reality of where they're going when they frame it that way. And just the sense of like a dead name, for example, it's, I understand like the potential like pain of like hearing it. Like I can understand that, but I also don't, I think that the way we talk about this stuff matters a lot with how people are processing it, both in like as themselves and in the wider society. And I think like unfortunately because of there just being an inherent transphobia for all the reasons you're discussing, this is only exacerbating that problem. Because
I totally agree. Yeah. Rule number one in psychoanalysis: if you have any hatred towards anything you've ever been, deal with it, because you will still live with it, and it'll come back to haunt you when you least expect it. So you've got to deal with that. That's why I talk about the root of the phallus. Now, phallus is the symbol of adulthood. And the root of the phallus means own your history, know where you come from. It's fundamental to religion, as fundamental as rite of passage is. Just fundamental is to have a root of the phallus. Like, who are you? Where do you come from? What are your genes? What were you born with? Own your history. That's exactly why all the best transition cases, everyone has this one thing in common. They keep pictures of who they were. They keep the name somewhere as well. They have that story read at any time. And just like when everybody else says, well, this was me when I was 12 years old. They go, oh, this was me when I was 12 years old. They own it. I don't believe a transition is successful until I see that. And this is the lesson learned from psychoanalysis that psychoanalysis brings to transition, is to own your history. And of course, in psychoanalysis, well, you also have to go through your hatred towards your mother, hatred towards your father, and finally explain that they only did what they did because of cause and effects as well. So you eventually have to accept your entire family, your background, your history before psychoanalysis is finished. But what you need to do with the transition cases, is to completely keep the pictures and everything of their past and own it. I agree with you totally.
Something else came up for me while I'm sorry, you can go ahead. I've been talking too much.
No, you're fine. Like, obviously it's harder to even like understand where we came from in this culture, right? Because everything that Bard was talking about earlier, where, you know, like we don't have like a good gender sex to begin with, like model to begin with. So like playing against that backdrop, like when you're coming from one thing and going to another, you don't know what you came from, you don't know what you're going toward really. So you like gravitate around that super hard and hold to it really tightly. And then there's transphobia attacking you. So you're like even tighter about it, you know. And if you can stay open and loose, like the irony is that transphobia can't hit you as hard because you're like, yeah, like I was a dude, part of me is a dude, whatever, like I still have these tendencies, you know, like you understand the paradoxes and the ambiguities about it, so you don't, like, you're not as vulnerable to it in the first place. And so when you see people like, oh well, you're a man entering women's spaces or whatever, I'm like, yeah, well, you know, I still have a dick, but it's not very big anymore, you know. Like there's just like a lot of like pressure that's taken off of you.
Yeah, the problem with binary is that's the same as digital and the same as zeros and ones. Okay, so the whole idea of binary and being terrified of anything non-binary is basically the world is on and off, zeros and ones, on and off, zeros and ones, right? And men and women. So, well, there is certainly men and women in a general sense, but not in an exact sense. So there's something to play with. And by the way, we have hormone shots and we have surgery and we have brains. And sometimes, not that often, but sometimes the brain and whatever is on the body doesn't align with each other. When a few fixes, actually, we can improve on this quite a lot. So we have something to play with. Now we can't do that. So are we not going to do that at all because you, with your limited mind and your unimaginative, humorless worldview, sit there and says it has to be on and off? Listen, autism is your problem. It's not our problem. Our thing is just trans. So we're going to go trans and you have to learn to live with it, because you can't sit with somebody just on and off all the time and try to play into their worldview, because their worldview is blatantly wrong. It always was. Nature is fluid. It's not fixed. Nature per se is fluid, not fixed.
I think a lot of this comes back to the idea of like the well-rounded individual. Like this idea that like each of us as like our own, like we're just ourselves, and then we have to like exhibit and demonstrate all these qualities that used to be spread through many people, like as just ourselves, and to have like some kind of idea of that as being like essential to us in terms of like how we can engage in society. And what I like about the idea of archetypology is that it gets more into the like it's okay to lean into your difference. Like it's good to lean into your difference because your difference is being matched elsewhere outside of you. And I feel like that like expectation to be all things all at the same time is just something that has confused gender dynamics a lot. And it's like it makes it so that everybody, to me, it just seems like everybody's less effective this way. And effective being like a weird word to use for it, but it just doesn't nobody is really being truly who they are, and so there's just kind of like a blandness to the expressions of identity in that scenario. Yeah.
Yeah. I like, for one thing, like now that I've been transitioning, like I love men and masculinity like so much more, because I'm like, oh, I can see how wonderful it is. Like these guys who are like, you know, this kind of like strong, like holding energy that comes in, and you're like, oh, thanks. Now I can like do my thing more freely. And it's just, it like feels so amazing to have, you know, and like, I don't know, it could be like lots, you know, lots of variety within that, but like just these different kinds of people. Yeah, like men, like Fanny Norland talks about, like men don't need to like emulate women in the way that they're like being like feminine or something like that. Like it just feels, again, it's like I get like kind of grossed out by it, like a little bit of like creeped out by it in itself. But when like a man is a man and just kind of owns it, there's like a gentle, compassionate side to that, of course, and like it's great. Like I love it.
I was curious about Aydan's experience with the logos pathos split, and also in the thread you mention beginning to understand religion, like and the man's need for religion. Can you talk a little bit about that? That was just so fascinating to me to hear what you feel from the inside of that experience. Yeah.
Yeah. I was playing with some I do this thing where like I don't have any academic right to do this, but I like to just play around with ideas. And so there's this movement in the John Vervaeke world. He's been talking about this idea of ratio religio, And so just kind of a right proportioning of our connectedness with each other and with the world. And the idea that this is something that's kind of like happening at many levels and in different ways, and it's all these interrelations and everything. And somehow, like in the mixture of like thinking about that and then starting to interact on the IDW, one of the things that came up was this idea that there's a way that, you know, I was very spiritual when I was younger. Like I had this sense of just like I was really in it. I was constantly playing outside and just like felt super connected and sensitive to like all of the life around me. And you know, I grew up in this devout Mormon household, and so I was in a situation where I was, you know, constantly going to church and going to different meetings and stuff for that. And I was always very like what I would describe as like spiritually moved. Like, so I would like the way that they call it is like feel the spirit. So I would like just feel like very emotionally open. And that's something that like just came so naturally to me. And in comparison to the other siblings in my family, like they would talk about it as like a thing that was unique to me, that I was very spiritual. When I transitioned, it was like I feel like there was just a way that it's hard to describe. It's like I like I've said before, I've got like a little bit more detachment. There's like more of a boundary between me and like the world. And it became much more alive for me that I needed to have some structure to be able to facilitate, to be able to come together and like basically encourage that connection with the world. That you know, John Vervaeke will talk about an ecology of practices. I'm sorry, my phone is ringing. So he would talk about an ecology of practices. And so it kind of like occurred to me that you could think of it as like men practice religion, but there's a way that women just, and I should say the feminine, just they are religious. Like there's something about the feminine that is much more so immediately, and I shouldn't say immediately in tune, but it's that like difference in the boundary, I think, is a lot to do with it. In terms of the way that we interface with the world and the people around us. And so for men, like with the logos and pathos split, it makes a lot of sense to me that they would need to kind of like come together and literally practice that kind of connectedness to their community and to the world. I'll stop there for now. I think there's more to say, but be interested in your thoughts.
Yeah, I've had the one-liner, religion is for men and spirituality is for women. But rather you could twist it around. It's more correct to say that men practice religion and women practice spirituality. And I like it because we have developed the two terms religion and spirituality to mean different things over the last 50 to 100 years. So I think it's a good thing. Just like we're playing with sex and gender. It makes language richer. And it seems that women agree with me quite a lot on that one. So see where you end up with that one, Aydan. So I would love to disagree with anything with Aydan tonight, by the way, but I haven't found one yet. Maybe it's just the terminology here that about the women in the room. So how about Rachel and Raven? Do you practice spirituality or religion? What do you call it?
Yeah, I can't see you, so I'll just jump in. So yeah, like I talked about it on the thread too. Like I started with John's ecology of practices, and I hit a wall with it. And you know, his advice with resistance to practice is, you know, send meta toward it, send like this loving kindness toward it. So I did that, you know, so it could like transform or whatever. But the thing that came back to me was like this like feeling of beauty and love. Like the resistance itself was beauty and love. And I was like, oh, this is not wrong. Whatever. It just felt so good. I was like, actually, I need to like switch everything around. I need to like do this whole thing differently, not just the set of practices or whatever, but like I need to be gardening instead of doing an ecology of practices. Like I need to like dance to the beloved in the morning. I need to like put on makeup and like, offer it to Athena or something as like a kind of a playful ritual kind of thing, and not practice. It's like I love that line you have, Bard, and it's like it really speaks to something that's hard for me to pin down. The sense of beauty. I'm thinking about like gardening, literally, and stuff like that for older women. It just seems like there's like a really enticing truth in there somewhere.
And what I mean is that spirituality is like the foundation, it's the groundwork, right? And it just comes natural to women because they can stay in the mythos. So it's just there. I think what Aydan means too. Religion is organized in a different way. And the reason is because men need to be contained, and they know that masculinity need to be contained, and many groups need to be contained. And that's why we organize them. And the two words for that is religion and nation eventually, if you take it to extend tribe to something larger. It's religion and nation we talk about in that sense. And I think that's what men need. They need that. So what men do before they think subject and object, they think project. So, for example, I take men's to a men's event. I don't put them in groups to sit and talk about their feelings like women would do instantly. Because straight men just get stopped. They don't know what to do. Now, I send them off into the forest, preferably to build a fucking totem pole or something like that. They can worship their own dicks or whatever. They build the totem pole and they start talking. And they start talking to each other about everything in life because they're building something together. Meaning that if men need a project to even experience their own subjectivity, again, we're in the social realm here with everything we're talking about. Like, again, when I said to go into transition, when do I know as a psychoanalyst I'm going to strongly recommend a transition? I take them on a date in a social milieu. That's where I try out to see how they react to that milieu. It's exactly like Aydan said, we're not individuals, we're not alone. All of this happens, and especially the brain or the mind as a sexual organ operates in the social constantly. It's a social idea. It has all kinds of social ideas. And I think that makes sense there as well. So spirituality comes naturally for women. For men, spirituality makes no sense unless it is contained in a group of men and they can practice it together. And this is what we historically call religion. That's why I'm making that wordplay. And maybe this is also, and in another case, there's that John Favarki, just like Emma Gilchrist, we love him to bits, but he's too masculine to actually go into the female spirituality. Like Emma Gilchrist writes beautiful books about the split brain. He's talking about the masculine brain constantly. He's not talking about the female brain. We need books about the female brain. And we need people to go into female practices, preferably gardening. Gay men and women do gardening and they're spiritual.
Yes, totally. Like that's I've been like going more in that direction with time too, because it's like, well, I'll just change the practices I do. And I'm like, like it's still like not enough. Like the whole paradigm is wrong. It's like there's this more devotional relational aspect to it. There's more beauty and magic to it. Like inherently, it's just instant, and like cooking, gardening, all that stuff. It's like a lifestyle thing more than like almost more than a practice for me. So anyway, I'm interested in hearing what Raven has to say.
Oh yeah, I mean, I feel like I've learned more about spirituality from Owen than but this is, I mean, I think from my experience, it's been pretty twisted up. Like I definitely resonate with Rachel when you're talking about makeup. I was like, yeah, okay, no, I do like, I love the ritual of appearances and playing with appearance and like the extending of appearance. I think that I can see that attention to detail and as part of my process, but at the same time, like I think for me, I've been intentionally going into women's work and into the feminine, and because I don't feel like I have a native understanding of it, and it feels like it's coming from a very like logical point of view, and Owen is constantly like telling me I'm in the logos.
Use my logo.
Like in the logos, like.
Are you coming out as a lesbian femme here to fit the pattern?
I've been thinking about this a lot. Actually.
Why am I not surprised?
I'm like, I just can't quite. Yeah. So, yeah.
But isn't this exactly what I said? that you are comfortable going between the woman of logos and the woman of mythos, and you have both inside of you? Isn't that exactly how you identify yourself, right? Isn't that you? You see again how narratives and narratology here is so strong that it's even stronger than anything like gender or sexual orientation, because it follows from narratology.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, also I used to be much more androgynous when I was especially after I got out of high school. I started dressing very masculine, and then I decided I wanted to like figure out what being a woman was all about. So I grew my hair out and I started dressing like a woman. And then the other day I started wearing men's clothes again, and I was like, fuck, I feel good.
And she looked great.
Wearing Owen's pants the other day. So yeah, I think this like the androgyny and like playing between both sides has definitely been part of my experience just personally, and I've been learning so much from transgender women about what it's like to be a woman, because otherwise I'm kind of lost in the situation. But yeah, so that's my story. And then yeah, we've been I mean with learning about magic and tarot, and yeah, I come here to London, visit Owen, and I'm learning about that stuff from him. So then I can definitely see the androgynous spirit in Owen, and that's I think a lot of why we work so well together, because we kind of hold this cross spirit, that can be so creatively juicy.
And the thing is, I like Aleister Crowley. I like Thelema. I'm not particularly interested in Buddhism and Eastern religion, and in the Crowley system, it's all about, I would say, using the mythical narrative to unlock your will, so to actually unlock your capacity to do things and to build projects, which I find it aligns very nicely actually with Alexander's thought as well. And even Crowley himself does often kind of point back to Zoroastrianism as being, I mean, the word magus itself, right? Magic comes from magus. And of course, it gets wrapped up with a bunch of dualist stuff over 2,000 years. But actually, the core of it, I think, is this worldview of the kind of Nietzschean. We have a will. It is ethical to discover your will and do your will. And there are practices. You can use logos to do that. That's basically what science is. And you can use mythos to do that. That's basically what art is. Bud, you're muted.
You're muted, Bud.
Oh, I was just censored because I said you can use your pathos and make pornography, but we have ethical narratives too, They're not for children, though. They're behind closed doors.
Yes.
I think there's something interesting that was on my mind going back about the men and religion question, because there are some interesting cases of men, especially men who are really into these dualist religious systems. They have the huge spiritual crises because they're so desperate for this unity with this God that's forever beyond them, which women don't seem to have. Women can kind of just be like, I'm with the thing. Whereas a man who's desperately trying to be a Christian is really fucking fighting for God every fucking day. That's Jordan Peterson, desperately trying to find the God that he can never find.
Well, I think that has to do with the fact that in men's work, it's very simple. I said, you got a throat here. You got a man above the throat, and you got a man beneath the throat. And whenever men have started creating problems in history, we get the men who love themselves above the throat, but hate whatever's beneath the throat. We call them pillar saints. And we have the men who hate everything above their throat because they hate men who can think. And they love everything beneath the throat because they totally empathize with their bodies, but hate their own minds. The guys who are looking desperately for the transcendent God are not embodied. They're not in their two masculinities. They're not into the both mind and the body. The mind and the body also being the true brain halves. This is a logos and pathos dichotomy. Now, if you want to escape one half of you because you're ashamed of it, or you don't believe in it, or you hate it, or whatever, because you only want to be with half of you as a man, it's ridiculous. You go either for the logos, you go to the pathos, you become the pillar saint or the boy pharaoh. The problems we have, what we call the problems with patriarchy, the problems we have in men over the last 3,000 years or whatever, has been when society gets affluent enough, these pillar saints and boy pharaohs pop up all the time with their crazy ideas. And they're little boys, they're 11-year-olds. That's what they are mentally, 11-year-olds. They're not embodied. They're not in the body. They're not in the mind at the same time. A man is a man who lives with the contradiction between his mind and his body. And he loves the woman, or for that matter, the gay man, who can love him for being that contradiction. That's what masculinity is. And apparently Aydan speaks very strongly about it here, because he made an effort to be that contradiction and to live with it and experience it. That's how attractive it is. So yeah, I'm stuck in that one too. And what I do is that I just walk up on the stage from the men's event. I said, look at this skinny little dirty old pervert. He's 62 years old by now. Not much of a threat to you muscular guys in the rooms. Do you think I feel threatened by you? No, I don't, because my strength is above my throat. But I love what's beneath my throat because I want to be a complete and embodied man. And I've worked on it to be exactly that, and stay with that contradiction, so that I can admire men who are stronger than me and more masculine than me, and appreciate the protection and the provision they give to me as the physically weaker and mentally stronger man in the group. And that's what archetypology is.
Mm-hmm. Well, how do we want to take this for the last kind of 15 minutes of our segment? Do you have a direction?
Can I ask Rachel and Raven a question though first?
Oh, of course.
How does it feel to be whole? Because you got the matrix mamilla. It's in your hormones as well, right? So you are a division that walks around as a totality anyway. So
Yeah, it's, I would say, really entertaining in a way, because you watch the guys, right? And that's the only way I would know, I think, wholeness is by watching men, right? So I can see that like what's happening to them is like, oh, like look at them like doing all these stunts on their motorbikes and like, or whatever it is that's going on. Like it's just like entertaining as hell to watch like what guys are doing. It's like great to be around them. And so like that's the feeling to me is like it's super fun. Like I don't know, like that's been my experience with like transition in that sense of like the mythic, and just being able to walk into like a car dealership with my girlfriend, and like we're looking at a Subaru, of course, and so like I'm like looking at this thing and like, oh, it's really pretty, and then the guys are like, well, can I interest you in this? And I'm like, oh, but this one's really pretty though, like look at it, and then they're like, oh, okay, let me take care of this, and then like run around the shop and like do all this stuff, and it's like great, and I'm sure they're having a good time doing their guy thing, and like it's like the whole thing is beautiful, and like we don't have to work at it. It's just like a magical dance that we're doing, and so the feeling, I don't know, to me it's like there's such an ease to it, like that I don't think I would have known other than transitioning and watching men now, like I can remember like vaguely some kind of version of that, like lesser wholeness or something in me, of course, and like feeling like, oh yeah, like I'll probably forget about it in 10 years. I won't remember what that was like or something.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say for us men, it starts with mother, right? And being different from mother. So I have a sister too, but my sister is like, she identified with mother. And I couldn't, obviously. That was the first point, right? Phallic intrusion makes me not identify with her. And I think it's the wholeness. There's something complete about her that I lack as a man. And that obviously drives my sexual orientation towards women as well. Mm-hmm. It is to find that temporary sense of wholeness. And I don't mean it like again, it's just difference here. I'm not, and there's no hierarchy between the two. It's just a beautiful combo. It's like sexual attraction is this, like Lacan says, this impossible attraction to something we can never have, and it goes on and on and on, it never stops. And of course, it is theatrical. It's to some degree it's superficial. You girls get embarrassed when I say, how does it feel to be whole? But you are whole in the projection. Men are projecting a wholeness onto you as women. Mm-hmm. If nothing else, at least you're great at multitasking, right? you got holding the baby there and doing the diapers, talking to a friend on the phone, eating the vanilla, putting something out in the kitchen, in the oven, or whatever at the same time, and having a shower. And I know professionally that you do put women into multitasking jobs. They're just absolutely superior, right? Controllers, whatever. So that speaks volumes about what we mean with wholeness, and men say that. Men are focused at one thing at a time and then try to do that really, really well. And then it's the next thing coming and the next thing. This is what our logos does to our pathos, right? I think Aydan described it quite beautifully before, how he's really focused as an engineer on getting all the details right and putting all the things in order, and then he can work, right? And that's precisely the beauty of being the dichotomy and the opposition. But to me, wholeness started with I love my mom. She's 89 years old and she has a big garden.
Yeah, it reminds me as well, there's the thing around, I think you can see it, how men and women, especially when they're young, living in cities, people often just have 1 or 2 rooms to themselves. Look at how people decorate their rooms. Women, very often, there's a sense for the whole. Everything has its place. I've had these arguments with my girlfriend because my rooms were messy. She said, just find a place for everything, and then you know where the place is, and then if it's ever out the place, you just put it back in the place, and it's fine. I go, what the fuck? How the fuck am I supposed to remember all these places with these different things I own? Whereas a guy's room very often more looks like the cockpit of a fighter ship. There's a table, there's a desk with a computer at it, there's some energy drink cans and coffee mugs around it from 3 days ago. And you basically sit there and jerk off and type and do whatever the fuck else you do, and then go to bed when you're too tired, and then get up in the morning and go back to it. And the rest of it just kind of does what it has to do to support the flying of the spaceship.
Owen and Raven has stayed with me at the Urban Monastery here in Stockholm with Victor and Joachim, and it's exactly like Owen just described it.
Raven, do you want to answer the wholeness question? I'm just curious.
Yeah, it's interesting. I would say the wholeness, it actually does come to me when thinking about nesting, being in a space and kind of like the inside going out and just being expressed in this, especially in a 3-dimensional space. Like for me, there's the need to kind of bring the inside of my experience and extend it outward. And it's both like in kind of attire and expressiveness with clothing and makeup and hair, but then also beyond that. If I have the space, I've been nomadic for the last 2 years, so I haven't really had the chance to do this recently. But when I have my little nest, it's like my inside is just like oozing out of me and like crawling up the walls, and there's all sorts of detail. Like there's just so many little tiny things. Like when you walk into a woman's house, there's little things all over the place and tiny little stuff and like little scenes, like dioramas. Like you walk into a little space and like on the shelf there's like a tiny little thing. So there's always something to look at. I mean, and I think in a way this is like walking into the garden where there's petals and there's different shapes and plants and all these different things to see. And it's like it has a look from a distance, but as you get closer it also becomes more intricate and beautiful. And everything does have a place within this composition of colors and textures and smells and experiences. There's a heightened sense of there's just a heightened experience of the senses, I feel. And that's I guess what femininity feels like very naturally to me. When it's come to being in social relations, I think I've had a much more of a dissociative experience where like I really wanted to be with the men. I wanted to be like the men. I wanted to work with the men. When I got like I did trail work and carpentry, and whenever I was on a team with men and we were working together, I would get so excited. I'd be so happy. I was like, yes, we're doing stuff, So and I also felt like to fit in, I think I put in a lot of effort when I didn't. Now that I've gotten older and I understand more about the projection of wholeness that I receive from men about being a woman, now I just relax. I'm like, oh, I don't need to do any work to be here. I can just be here. I can just chill and like I don't have to entertain anybody. I can just like be a presence, and people like that. And yeah, when I was younger, I was much more like I wanted to get in the arguments and make sure my like my thoughts were being heard and I was adding to the conversation. But I've definitely started to just like relax into the easefulness of presenting as a woman and being this thing in the social sphere. So I think for me, I've had to figure that out. And then I do like to switch on and be in my more masculine state when, of course, which is also fun. And I'm sure, like Rachel, yeah, you probably love that too. Obviously, you're here, so
Yes, yeah.
yeah, I think probably you and I could relate a lot, having a lot of the logos as well as that like mythos experience, which is really cool. And because it's not every woman that I meet who has that side, some do, but some are like actually extremely turned off by like going into these like abstract and spaces. They're like,
Yeah.
why would you do that to my creative expression? So yeah, that's my experience.
Yeah. Oh, cool.
Yeah. Amazing. Wow. Okay. Well, anything else that wants to be said? Anything that has come up for you all, or closing statements or thoughts as we get around to 2 hours now?
I love this conversation, but I have to be honest also, I think we're up for a really, really bumpy ride ahead of us. We're literally now began to move around some incredibly strong archetypes. And I mean that seriously. It's just what technology has done to human beings is that sex has started to move as well, besides gender. I think the Indians have gone ahead and they radically, for 2 decades now, have introduced the third gender as a legal category and solved the issue. They don't have the debate that's poisoning America at the moment. I think a radical move like that would be very, very helpful right now. Just add a third category. We're perfectly happy to be the third category. We can fill anything in that because it will be the category of multiplicity anyway. But I think it would help the regular Joes and the regular Joes feel more comfortable about themselves. And if you can get them to feel more comfortable about who they are, they will allow us to be what we are. It's going to be very bumpy.
Yeah.
Because of the forces that are involved in this. We go to the very core of human identity here.
Yeah.
We do. I love you guys. It's been a wonderful conversation. Love you.
It has.
Thank you so much.
Rachel and Aydan, you guys are stars. I really think you guys should have a podcast.
Yeah. It's so cool.
Oh,
Yeah.
I just like being on your guys' podcasts.
Wow, that's always fun too. Yeah.
I gave you a prophetic vision here. One of my best friends is a trans man, and he's been a trans man for most of his life. And he just told me the other week, I'm so fucking tired of the prefix. He's the kind of guy that nobody would ever believe that he was once a woman. He's so far. But it's because he's lived almost his entire life as this man. So he's become it so fully. And we had a laugh at it. We had a laugh at it. It's like, can I just drop the prefix? It's just like, yeah, it's like social identity. It's there. It's a social identity. It's there for others to not be too confused about things, obviously. But yeah, that's where we're heading. We're heading to that point. You guys, Aydan, Rachel, you're heading there as well.
So one of the questions that I have that popped up a couple of times is whether it makes sense. I actually accidentally had like a period of time where I was not on testosterone, and I actually experienced, like, I started menstruating and I started like having the shift emotionally. And it just makes me wonder in all of this as we think about the shamanoid specifically as a within the trans identity, that part of it, whether it makes sense to like actually play around in that way too, to actually purposefully go off of your hormones for a period of time to reassociate with that experience. And it's
I would say then if you are shamanoid, then that could be a possibility. But I
Yeah.
compare this a lot. The type of patients I have as psychoanalysts, the much more common patients are ADHD patients. And I'm talking about highly intelligent ADHD patients. The low intelligent one, the ones you discover when they're 8 years old, you put them in a special class under supervision and they fuck up their lives instantly, right? The highly intelligent people with ADHD don't discover it until they're 35, 40 years old. And it finally catches up with them because their intelligence is compensated for the ADHD. I tell you what, once they start taking the Lonza or the drug we give them, and they're on the methylphenidate, they come back to me, they do them 5 days a week out of 7 days, finally start doing them 7 days a week. Finally they get to a point where they totally identify with the person they become. It's completely unthinkable for them to not take the drug every day the rest of their lives. And I'd say the vast majority of trans people are exactly like that. The liberation they felt from the first hormone shot means that they should stay on the medication or the hormone shot the rest of their lives. If we do this with ADHD patients today, the quality of life, their ease with relationships, their finances, everything in their life is fixed. They're off anything else. They can go to sleep at night. It's fantastic what we're doing right now with ADHD patients, and they're a lot more common than the trans analysts that we have. But I compare the two. And I would highly recommend most trans people that once you made a decision, take the hormone shot, do it the rest of your life every day. For the vast majority, I would say that. But if you do discover you have a shamanoid disposition, then no dogma applies. Everything's up, right, in the air. But I would not recommend the vast majority of trans people, no.
No, I mean, that's
Yeah.
definitely not the spirit that I was making the suggestion under. It's
No.
just kind of a curiosity that I have as we think about the insights that are generated potentially by playing around with that.
Well, I can give an example. TNT is one of the best tantra schools in the world. They really focused on tantric sex. I love working with them. They make it mandatory when you do second grade to transition to drag to as a guy you have to dress up as a woman, and you're not finished until you actually get turned on by looking at yourself in the mirror. Same thing goes with women. We talk about the straight people here. Obviously, with the gay people, it's the opposite. You have to do that. It's part of the routine, because otherwise you cannot imagine what you're actually attracted to. And it's incredibly liberating for people to do that. This, what you're talking about here, is something similar to that, but you would then do it with the hormones instead. So you would go back and to see what would that experience be like. Yes, we do that, for example, in psychiatry. Lithium, for example, is very challenging. But manic-depressive, people who suffer manic-depressive have to take lithium, more or less, at least microdose it. They have to take lithium in their mix. After 4 years, we allow them the opportunity to get off the lithium medication for a few months and see what happens. Then they can make up their minds whether they stay on it the rest of their lives or they never want to go back on it. Because the problem after 4 years for them is that the lithium patients I have fantastic lives, behaviorally, careers work, relationships work, they go to work, everything looks fine. And you ask them, okay, so what is your life like? Well, I'm sure you who work on the medication side of things, this is fantastic because the statistics must look great because I'm a very successful person. My life is ordered. Nobody sees a trace of my disease any longer, but I hate it. I live in a gray fog. See how this is when I talk to transition patients, the same thing? Same thing here. And then I said, well, then you're allowed to go off the lithium because you've actually been through it 4 years, see what happens. But this is like for people who take on something worse. It's a bit like if I had you in front of me and forced you to get off your hormones. That's what a lithium patient is like. As if you have to save them by taking them off the hormone. That's what lithium works like. So of course, after 4 years, allow them to get off it for a few months and see what happens. But when I usually recommend people to change their life patterns, because for something like that, they must come back and say, there's something fundamentally wrong with this. It doesn't make any sense. And I was okay, then we can get off whatever and see what happens. But for me, to supply the joy of supplying that first hormone shot to a clearly trans person and see the joy in their eyes when that happens means that I've put my full heart behind saying my default recommendation is to stay on this the rest of your life every day. Just like I do with ADHD patients when they get their amphetamines the first time. Stay on this the rest of your life every day.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. I just, it's more of a perspectival thing. It's a perspectival knowing that I was curious about, and you know, all that being said as far as like bringing this up. I'm sorry I brought it up right as we were trying to close, but
No, I think it's a fantastic
I
question. And listen,
Yeah.
you as a trans person, you don't owe anybody anything because of your experience.
Sure.
You don't owe anybody. We're
Sure.
talking about how trans people have opened up to autosexuality. For me and Raven, as anthropologists, to understand that everybody's autosexual was only seen by us through the trans eye. But you don't owe anybody anything, or you don't owe to go into any experiments because of your specific life situation. Just enjoy life to your fullest, follow your desire. That's all you need to do, like everybody else, nothing else.
Well, guys, this has
Oh
been an
my God.
absolute delight.
Oh, good.
Big love, Brosters.
Absolutely.
Big love.
love.
Big love.
Much love.
Thank you again.